Hi everyone, and it's another episode of Battlefield Breakdown. My name is Mykola Bielieskov, and I'm a research fellow at Ukrainian National Institute for Strategic Studies, and also senior analyst at Ukrainian biggest non-governmental charity Come Back Alive. And today, I'd like to step aside from the current battlefield, maybe geopolitics, and to talk more broadly about number of important things related to strategy and liberal postmodern society, some tensions that Russian-Ukraine war made visible. Because as for me, if we don't take into account this kind of tensions, we're in a big trouble, really big trouble, because Russian-Ukraine war is only a beginning of the process of restructuring our world, and the stakes are extremely high. So point number one, we have a problem that election cycles with 4 or 5 year period, they conflict with classic military building, because the period for classic military building is at least 5 or even 7 years. So you plan how you're going to build your armed forces based on a doctrine of operation, based on the modern technologies, tactics, training program, and also staffing problems, and then you implement. And we have a problem that, unfortunately, most of the politicians, they concentrate on next elections. So they have only one target, and it's how to win next elections. And usually when it's election year or period approaching election year, everything else is put aside. Usually when this government is elected, they have a period of transition. And in terms of strategic planning, it takes year, 2 years just to devise your own national security strategy, national defense strategy, and then strictly military documents. And the first 2 years they are spent just to devise all these documents. And then there is a problem of implementation. And usually, if it's 4 years in US, for instance, so first 2 years you spend on the documents, and then you have 2 years. And then if luckily you are re-elected, then you have some time. If no, then another administration comes to power, and usually they start from the very simple things. They say, everything that was done by predecessors is not right. Now we are in power, and we are the ones who are going to do right thing. And then we have a problem about money. Even in US, the most richest, most powerful country in the world, they have now the strategy of divest in order to invest. So they are surrendering, they are retiring all the platforms quicker than they are fielding newer platforms. And with this retirement of older platforms, they try to save some money. So even in US, being most powerful, most richest in terms of GDP and all else, they have a problem of funding. So it's directly related to the fact that cycle of documents, planning and formulation takes some time. And then it's the issue of finance. It's usually the situation when you need to list some priorities, you need to sacrifice something in order to prioritize something. So that's the problems. And again, 5-7 years, that's minimum requirement. Actually, it might take up to 10 years. And it's bigger than 2 election cycles in ordinary European and North American country. And that's a problem. Democracy is a valuable thing. It's a right thing if everything is in place. But it has some other sides. So Putin can plan for 10 years. Xi Jinping can plan for 10 years. While in Europe or North America, it's just 5 or 4 years of election cycles, with usually, again, when it's election year, everything is secondary. So it put aside, no one is interested in governance, in long-term project. It's just to get re-elected, and that's it. So we see that, that's another issue I hope we'll cover in some other episode, that different types of regime, we can say that democracy has all the advantages, and authoritarians don't have at least tactical advantages. So it's not right. So that's a good example that with advantages of democracy, we also have some kind of disadvantages that should be kept in mind, and hopefully some bureaucrats manage to preserve some continuity while there is transition from one government to another government. We've seen how it worked even in the Russian-Ukraine war, when Republican Party, for whatever reason, for more than half a year, they blocked aid for Ukraine, because they thought that if they block aid for Ukraine, it would benefit them electorally. Fortunately, they reassessed their calculation. Eventually, they agreed that if they block aid for Ukraine, it would not benefit Republican Party. But we see how these election cycles and the construction of armed forces, implementing strategy in general, conflict. And actually, looking at other examples, I would say it's a kind of miracle that, for instance, NATO and certain NATO countries like US and others, they were able to implement continuous containment strategy vis-a-vis USSR 40 years. Because right now, that's quite a challenge to sustain proper attention. Usually election cycles and political considerations for the elections, they from time to time supersede the needs of strategy and war fighting. That's one thing. Another thing, at least in two different dimensions, we see how modern post-liberal society has a huge conflict with proper strategy. So one of the major ideas of the postmodern liberal society is that human comfort, consumption is the most important thing. So people, voters, they usually evaluate politicians by the fact whether they are going to give them some social benefit, proper level of consumption, comfort, and that's one of the ideas that become dominant in Europe and in North America since 1945. But simultaneously, we see that modern war fighting, it requires also resources. And the problem is that 2% of the GDP that was considered the minimum amount is not enough. At the last summit, 23 of 32 NATO countries, they said that now we attained this goal after 10 years of after Wales summit, after all-out aggression against Ukraine. But the problem is that it's not enough. How much is enough? I think it's at least 4 or 5% of the GDP. It's amount of the GDP that was spent on defense during 1980s, when it was the last peak of the Cold War, when tensions were high. And another problem is that modern weaponry is so technological, so sophisticated that for a certain amount of currency, you can buy less amount of weaponry, unlike in 1980s when weaponry was not that sophisticated. Now even infantry weaponry that tended to be the cheapest one is not the cheap one. So modern main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, MLRS, they are also very technological one. So we see this conflict, and it's a very visible one, and it's a challenge for politicians. Let's be honest, politicians, media experts, they failed after 24th of February 2022 to persuade their constituencies to spend more. They didn't dare to challenge them, and that's another problem. So on the one side, we have consumerism and comfort and social benefits, and on the other side, we have the demand of bigger military spending. But there is another dimension, the third one, this conflict between postmodern liberal society and war fighting. It's about manpower. The war is eventually about the threat to die. For sure, you can mitigate this threat through the training, through the proper equipment, command and control. But in the end, war is still about threat to die. So there are some chances preserved no matter what. But simultaneously, postmodern liberal societies, they are built around the human. So the human being, its security, its health, and everything else, it's the sine qua non, it's the essence of the society. And here we have a problem, another one. How you are going to man the armed forces, generate proper level of manpower? And this problem is evident again in Russian-Ukraine war. So for the first 2 years, we managed to go relying on people who were guided more by heroic attitude. So they were ready to risk their life, to sacrifice their life. But the problem is that this resource is not indefinite. It's unfortunately is limited. And when we've seen the limits of this stock of people, this list of people who were ready to do this, despite the dominant idea that human security is most important one, then we have a problem and a challenge. And simultaneously, this challenge is evident in NATO countries when there are requirements. So what amount of people shall we have in the peacetime armies? And most of the NATO countries' armies don't meet this limit. So they have a problem of how you enroll people during peacetime. That's why there is another really important challenge. And that's why it's so important for NATO countries to support Ukraine. Otherwise, you'll have this problem. And I'm pretty sure that there would be a segment of people who are going to go to European Court for Human Rights, for courts in their countries and say, look, these people try to engage me into the armed forces and they violate my rights. And that's another problem, another tension. For sure, modern technologies has some promise and they compensate for the lack of mass, for the lack of number of people. But I think what Russian-Ukraine war also demonstrated is that you need to have the proper density of manpower, even if it's not a manpower that is fighting classical head-to-head with a mass of people and so on. It's like just those who operate UAVs or other unmanned platforms. So yeah, it can mitigate to the certain extent, but the problem of mass, proper amount of people is still important. As for me, the only solution should be that we should redefine the role of the military in modern society. We should make again the military career sexy, promising to the young people. Their job should be treated as something valuable by the bigger society. So it's not only about equipment. Yeah, just recently there was a beautiful land warfare conference done by Royal United Service Institute, and there were concluding remarks by the Chief of the General Staff of the Land Forces of the UK Armed Forces. And he said that we don't have more money, we can't engage quickly more people. So only thing that we can do is to increase lethality. And to increase lethality using modern technologies plus better tactics. But it still might be not enough. And it's not only about equipment. As for me, we need to do some things in terms of values, in terms of perception. We need, again, to make military career sexy and promising, and to engage young, talented people who would treat a military career, despite all the risks, because again, military career is inherently risky. They would treat this as a most promising avenue for self-fulfillment and promotion. So that's not only about technology, it's more complex thing. And that's why, while Ukraine is gaining some time for our European and North American partners, don't spoil this time. Use it wisely, including fixing these tensions, these contradictions that I defined. There is beautiful US doctrine document of 1980 that say that a human dimension of the war would remain most decisive one. And it's going to be the same way. So it's humans who wage war in the end, using modern technologies, but it's the humans. So we should also treat not only resources, these contradictions between election cycles and defense policy, but also human dimension specifically, and redefine everything related to military career to make it more popular among young people. This point and the also two previous ones, they in general demonstrate this tension between how our societies were structured after 1945, especially when people won World War II, when this liberal postmodern society started to form, and with the problems of war fighting and the problems of strategy. Because, again, getting people into the ranks was not popular, was not sexy. So people, especially young ones, they pursued careers, most civil one, like finance, jurisprudence, economy, and all other things. While professional military career was not sexy as it was, and that's a problem. And in general, our societies are structured in such a way that this topic is not popular. And we've even seen the atrophy in a field, I mean, among experts. You can look at the list of people who comment on Russian-Ukrainian war, maybe China-US tensions. It's mostly either people who grow up during Cold War in their 60s or 70s, or it's kind of people like me who, by chance, by coincidence, managed to get some interest and preserve it. So we have this number of challenges, how postmodern liberal society and needs of war fighting are in conflict, and we need to keep in mind these tensions, and while implementing strategy with a revisionist states like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, we should have these tensions in mind, and I'm pretty sure we need to start some dialogue, some debate as to what should be mediated. Otherwise, if NATO is presented with this kind of dilemma, they would be in really big trouble. So we should be grateful for Ukraine that with its stone defense demonstrated all these tensions, but we shouldn't be complicit and fall into complacency, because these tensions are really deep one, and they are the ones they might negatively affect NATO strategy, specific Western country strategy during this period of transition in world politics.